Climate change is often presented as just an environmental problem, but underneath it, economics is at play. People deciding how to price things, where to invest, and where incentives lie for businesses, governments, and people. The thing is, this is technically heavy stuff, and we need someone to break down these topics into something the general public can understand. Today's guest does that with such finesse. Aishwarya Rai is the host of the Next Gen Doers podcast. She studied development economics at Yale, and her work online revolves around breaking down the climate economy into something that is genuinely accessible for people like you and me. And so in this episode, we break down the climate economy, what it really means, where the opportunities are, and then we also break down the art of communicating effectively. Aishwarya is one of the most articulate speakers I've come across, and so this conversation was also a masterclass for me in the art of communicating ideas effectively. Here's my conversation with Aishwarya Rai. You know, while I was preparing for this episode, I tried to reverse engineer how you thought about your content, and I want to see if I was right. So, can you take us into how you think about creating a video from the ideation and then crucially the translation of this really dense economic language into something that someone like me can understand on Instagram?
I feel like, Ishan, first of all, you probably have a great grasp to begin with. But if we're talking about regular audiences, and my goal is usually I'm thinking of the person who might be already interested or is not quite fully there, but needs a certain kind of story or a kind of way to enter the climate conversation that isn't overly technical. So the ideation stage is usually, let's see if it's like climate chai in general. Usually I'm reading the news and I love to peruse for news around climate and not just disasters that have happened, but also like policies that are being made or shifts in the economy, in the green economy, and projects that have been launched or technologies. And think about this not just from the perspective of the news that's been launched, but also like what are the ripple effects. So I'll take some time and I don't force it. This is a difficult thing when you're in content creation where, there's a pressure to keep producing. But I like to let the ideas percolate by themselves and connections come up naturally, like have a bit of faith that my brain will make a connection at some point with cool news or interesting news for that matter. And then over time, I think a little bit more about like, what is it that people are not talking about enough? Is this idea one of those things? Or if it's a Carbon Bazaar series that I did, for instance, on carbon credits, why are we not talking about carbon credits in a way that's easy for people to understand and is this like very opaque subject that has a ton of exploitation happening on the fringes because people don't understand it well enough? So yeah, it's more like just paying attention to what is and isn't being discussed at the like general big zeitgeist level. And then hoping I can do the topic a bit of justice and then producing a video in a very conversational manner, or at least I try.
Yeah, and I think you make this very deliberate decision to not let go of depth. That's what I noticed. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like you are speaking to the thoughtful audience, the folks that are willing to sit and wait it out and see exactly what you have to say, and not the 20-second, 30-second scrollers. I think that was a conscious decision on your part, and I'd like to see if I was right.
I think it was more like a let's test this hypothesis of people's attention spans, because I feel my attention span has been shot to hell in a lot of ways, but I have a lot of faith that people care. That's like a hypothesis I have behind a lot of my content that I create, the videos that I create. And if they care, they'll stick around. They might watch things on double time, but I have a general belief that people care about, if not the planet, then themselves and the fellow, human folk that they love and care about as well. And so their attention will be related to that. Maybe it's a bit longer than most types of videos, but I mean, the amount of like engagement I get is usually an indicator that, people are actually listening. And because of that, that tells me like people want to engage with facts and with news and storytelling and humor around this very serious topic.
I think this hits at this larger debate that I think every climate advocate has. This idea of, should I present the economic argument or should I present the moral one? And I I don't know which one is more effective and what place each has. I'd love to know how you think about these two different ways of attacking the problem.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like, the moral argument, it's hard to tell someone outside of a religious place, let's say, that this is right and this is wrong and convince them that their actions are good or bad. Like, I think that that's just, you're not going to get a lot of traction that way. Um, like self-flagellation is not going to get more climate movement. It's not going to be helpful to the cause. Is my initial understanding. Is it well intentioned? Usually, I think so, but it's sitting in a quote unquote like global South country right now that hasn't contributed much to climate change. There's a lot of blame to be passed around, but I think blame is what stops conversations rather in its tracks. So the whole idea of going behind the economic argument is this is a language. I feel like economics is a language in which we can talk about people's well-being. It's kind of like a Trojan horse. Like we can talk about this because we all think about the economy. We all think about what's in our wallets at the end of the day. I hope. And this is a way that we can talk about it across borders. But if we talk about the morality of it, well, then it's a different conversation for different places. And for the people who ought to be listening, they will close their ears because no one wants to hear that they did the wrong thing.
I'm going to steal that line from you, by the way. That's a
Go for it.
beautiful line. Trojan horses. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Even just on this idea of morality, I will admit sometimes I play into that. And for example, recently I was in this rather pristine area of India and I saw a lot of trash. And I felt compelled to share it with the world, tell them that this is happening to these wild spaces. And the motive was to purely draw attention to this. But what I found was that this got people riled up, got people really angry, got people to type all sorts of colorful comments. And I sat there wondering, okay, yes, I got great engagement, but did I really help the problem? Or did I instead
Mm.
just create this echo chamber?
Hmm.
Do you find that happening with your content ever?
Sometimes. I think there was this one video that I did recently about El Nino, for instance, and like there were I made a joke at the end about like solutions and not having any right now because it is a pretty large scale issue, right? When we're talking about food systems and a massive natural weather event that happens every few years, but it's just going to be a bit exacerbated. And the comment section was like some people with solutions, other people with like, the solution is so privileged and blah, 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 blah. And so emotive. And I don't actually, initially I was commenting back or responding to certain comments, especially ones where people might actually say like El Nino happens all the time, so this isn't really a big issue. And I'd be like, no, actually, this is, and it's a gentle way of talking about it, not like a you're wrong, but actually, here's why this is particularly special, and that's all I'm going to say. But for the really emotive, like echo chambery conversations, I don't do a lot of housekeeping in my comments, mainly because it's like these are your fellow humans who care. Let's hear what other people have to say. But then I always think about this idea of a silent middle, like people who maybe think and act depending on facts. Are they the ones who are necessarily going to be taking the time to comment and be keyboard warriors? I don't know. I think certain opinionated people want their opinions heard, and they will be out there in the comments letting you know what they're thinking. Um, I don't think it's my job to stop those opinions from being shared. I kind of am creating something for the public. So, yeah, it's a bit weird, and I do feel a bit of pressure sometimes as well to ensure that I don't instill climate anxiety, but I can't stop that if it happens as well. I can only prod people to take up action when possible.
I'm sure on some level, you need to let go of the fact, you as in you, me, and folks just speaking for this cause, we need to let go of the fact that we can't control the arc in someone's mind of like the flow of thoughts that they go through. And I sometimes wonder, or rather, I just realize with each video that goes out that the choice of words that we use it's just very important. I think you have a very good grasp of the words that you use. And I just want you to take me, even if it's into your personal story, what role has communication played in your life? Because you clearly, out of and I've done a lot of interviews, I can tell you, you have a grasp of language which is unique. Take me to that journey of you and communication and how you've gotten to this level.
Sure. Thank you, by the way. That actually means a ton, given that I think when I was growing up, it wasn't my strongest suit. I was really pushed towards maths and the sciences. So, anyways,
The Indian prophecy, right?
you know what, man? Exactly. I think it's weird. I think it also came from a place of seeing poor communication at some points, like poorly communicated policies, poorly communicated news, or poorly communicated stories from the the west to the east and like back and forth. I've had the privilege of living in a few places and seeing how we communicate. And I think that was something that really shone out to me, that taking a second to listen. And I would say that a lot of my communication comes down to listening. And I know most of my job is to speak, but that I love to be quiet sometimes and just listen to people talk, because only then can you understand perspectives that aren't your own or could never be your own, just by virtue of who you are and who you were born to be. So I think the communication thing comes down to a lot of like the privilege of moving around in a lot of different places, um, but then also listening to what people have to say. What are the stories that don't get out? And also when you realize, when you speak in like these really high jargony ways and you realize there are some people who just will not listen to you and it falls flat on their ears. And you can do the, the nonverbal communication cues of their eyes are glazing over and they don't seem to be all that interested. You pick up on these cues that I can talk about this in the most technical way, and God, did I work hard to learn those technical ways of speaking. But that isn't going to be useful here. So it's also recognizing, who is it that I want to speak to? Do I need to impress them with my big terms? Not necessarily. I just need to tell them a story that is useful. Yeah.
I think this is perhaps in my view, the biggest problem in those advocating for the climate cause. I suppose that's where we come in, right? Just communicators. That's where I see the role of creators just going up. And so I'd love to know, where do you see the role of creators in this larger climate crisis? What role do we have to play? And what responsibilities do you think we have?
I'll start from the what we ought not to do, and then go maybe towards what we can do. But I want to start with, I think I don't dislike anything more than opinions being peddled as facts. Um, and I think, you know what, I think I would rather give my flowers first to all the climate communicators and storytellers out there, but I think we need, and we can't afford rather, to peddle opinions as facts. And I don't think this is a large scale issue, but I think this is something that I want to see a lot more of, that we are rooted in facts and we're like casually confident about the fact that we're working from a place of numbers and data and, having taken the time to study as well. Um, but I think what I want to see a bit more of is also like, how do I put this? There's this issue that I've noticed of creating the pool of who is right and who is wrong. And I want us to understand that while, yes, some people are not speaking in a very climate positive way or see the world in a we need to work on climate action, there might be a reason for those perspectives. And I think the role of a content creator is inherently to create like media, right? Like we are part of media, the new media age. Um, we entertain to some, even if it's for a few fleeting seconds, we entertain. But I think in that entertainment time, if we have a niche, if we have something that keeps people watching, I think we have a responsibility to give something good back. Nothing that maybe we piss people off every now and then and we give them a reason to be angry with the world or the governments or something like that. But I think give people back some form of truth, depending on what form of truth that we have, and give them our sources. Let people decide. Don't make them believe you just on your word. Give them the sources. If they choose to read it, that's on them. But let's do our part as well.
As you said this, I remember one reel of yours where it starts off with you talking about this rather complicated topic. I don't remember which one, but there's this lovely, I want to say, microsecond where you just show your exhausted face after having read this large term. And if I'm just trying to reverse engineer from there, someone who hasn't seen your content, if they come across you while scrolling,
Yeah.
that's what's going to cut through the noise. That's what's going to get them to linger and therefore, hear you out and maybe have some change in their mind. Take me into a moment where someone has reached out to you, whether via DM or in person, and told you that you've changed their mind, because I'm sure that's happened to you.
You know what? I'm not sure about changing minds. Maybe it's happened, but it's more like you've taught me something, or you taught me something about the job that I have, and like that I've been flying blind in so far. I think those are the most flattering ones where I'm like, okay, I got to keep going, because I think anyone who works in content and media in general um, will know that it can be a bit like, what the heck am I doing right now? How do I make this work long term? But when you hear people say things like, you've helped me, then yeah, those are moments where I'm just like, all right, I'll keep going. Like, feels like a calling in some ways, a vocation of sorts. All I have to do sometimes is switch off the voice in my head that tells me I studied to be an economist, and that content creation was not something I took seriously for a while, but it's helping in a different way. So yeah.
So where does, and not to name drop or anything, but you did go to Yale, and
Sure.
so I want to know what influence, and you can decide whether that's good or bad, but what influence did your journey at Yale have on what you do now?
That's a great question. So I went to study international and development economics. After, like, part of the reason I wanted to study development economics is I read Amartya Sen's Development as Freedom, I think, and that was like a mind blowing moment where I was like, oh my god, this subject that I tend to do really well in is a way I can help people. That's awesome. Let me study this. And then I had this brilliant master's program that was for about 8 or 9 months, which is too short a time, in my opinion. Like, it was a pressure cooker master's degree. And I think in that pressure cooker, I realized, there was once upon a time where I was really good at mathematics. That time was not then. So maybe becoming an economist and doing equations for the rest of my life was not the answer. But also, that there's a story over here that I feel like is not being told. Like, genuinely, my reaction to reading a bunch of studies by brilliant Nobel Prize winning, economists, um, was, this is very technical. I can understand it, thank God. But my family, who is from India, doesn't even know about some of these studies that are relevant to them. And I come from a very matriarchal style family. And I would read these studies about, the um, importance of having educated women within a family and community, and what that means for, wealth and children's health outcomes. And in reading this, I was like, I want to convey this to my family. Like, it's relevant to us, and it's relevant to the people that I meet. And I think it was just one of those moments where I was like, no, economic studies have a story behind them, but it's not relevant in storytelling just because the people who understand it better are busy doing important things as well. But if we told these stories, maybe policies would reflect it as well. And that was, I guess, kind of the long-term conversation in my head.
So, okay, economics enters your life in this manner, and you see it as a way to help people. When did climate become a lens through which you saw economics? Or rather, when did economics become a lens through which you saw climate?
I so I had the pleasure of working in a few INGOs and the UN system for a little bit as well. To be very specific, I interned in the UN system for a little bit, for landlocked developing countries and economic affairs, during which I saw what land degradation was doing to a lot of these landlocked countries and what that means for their economic development. A lot of them being the least developed countries, and then thus having, like, less, so to like, in a simple way, like, less money to really help uplift the people, right? And build economies. Then later on, I took an internship with this fund called Education Cannot Wait, and it's education in emergencies, where I worked on the risk and safeguarding side of things, and I saw what climate change means to a child's education, and what, having a flood or a drought means for a child going to school, whether it's affordability or kids needing to stay back and help their parents with their work or keep the home functioning, or girls getting married off young. And so it was this like quick way for me to learn through work. Also, when I came to Kenya for the first time, I was working for the International Rescue Committee, and there was a Horn of Africa drought at the time in 2022, and it was very intense. And learning about these intense, climate events and what does it mean for thousands of people, who already had it really tough. And seeing that these stories are not really making it back to, the States or elsewhere where decisions are being made, or at least not in the shocking way that they ought to have been. And I'm not assigning any blame in doing that, but it was one of those eye-opening moments where I was like, maybe fresh out of my master's, what is it about these places that are already endowed with difficult climate conditions, exacerbated by climate change and human-caused climate change? What is it about their economies locally that could, A, be a part of the solution, but has also put them in a position to be facing a lot of difficulty? And I wanted to stop looking at it from a very highly technical standpoint, because I didn't feel like that was helping me get to the human story. I was a bit hyperfixated on the human story, so I think there was maybe a forcible maybe a forcible marrying of my newfound like interest or exposure to climate change, climate action, um, and my background in economics. But I do think it's just, I see the world through an economist's lens, and I'm just exposed to a lot of these climate stories now by virtue of work and then slowly interest as well. Um, and it was just a methodology to parse out the situation and what's going to happen in the future.
Just a quick little break from the episode to say that if you've enjoyed this conversation so far, then please like and subscribe. I believe in first providing value and then asking for your subscription. And so if you feel like you've learned something and you have enjoyed this conversation, then subscribing genuinely helps. It helps me to continue bringing on incredible guests and creating more conversations like this. Now back to the episode. I'm going to mine your brain right now for insights.
Okay.
Let's look at the green economy as a large entity right now. If we're looking at the world, and if we're looking at sustainability as something that drives consumption. Again, I am not an economist. I actually took a few economics courses and then I decided I wanted to enjoy university. So I dropped those. But when it comes to sustainability, like as a consumer, I'd like to know, is it something that is consciously driving people's choices? When I say that, are there consumers, or are there a large chunk of consumers, and where are they, who are saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to buy this book instead of that book simply because this book is made sustainably.
Hmm. I think so, actually. Like, it's a self-selection issue, first of all. Like, the type of person I am is going to have a certain kind of friends. And while I would like to say that my friend group is diverse, there are certain people who I simply wouldn't agree with, right? But I know that I have friends that are more prone to making decisions that are better for the planet, but they will also take flights to go to places. Um, and they're not slowing their roll to travel if they have, the time and the means and the funds to do so. But I think there are a lot of friends that I have that are working on like the small actions that they can take at home, pursuing degrees that allow them to also contribute to solutions. Like, I have a friend who's like lived an amazing life in terms of the work that he's done, and is now thinking about pursuing a degree to help create better parks and green spaces in cities. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I do see it in people's buying decisions, in upcycling, um clothing swaps. I've been a part of so many clothing swaps groups. I absolutely love it. And the other day, I heard my mom taking part in this. So I feel like influence happens not just in our friends group, but it's sometimes this upwards influence that can happen. And children can be some of the greatest influencers to their parents and their families. So my mom used to hate it when I used to shop thrift. And I'm not sure why, but I've heard that this is a not uncommon thing in some Desi moms, where they're just like, why are you buying secondhand? And for context, my grandma's a fashion designer, so she's like, this is crazy to me. But one day she called me and she's like, I had this beautiful evening with these other women and we shared like, one woman's trying to downsize her home and her belongings. So she had like jewelry and stuff that she just wanted to like get rid of. And we kind of swapped. And I was like, Mom, that's exactly what I do and used to hate it. But I think people do make those decisions and people are quote unquote voting with their wallet in some ways. And it's showing, I think.
That's one argument that I've heard and I peddle it also, but I want to see if I'm doing the right thing. This idea that to trigger change in the market, we need to get large groups of people to vote with their wallets. For example, just the EV market, I can speak for India. The EV market has become a serious market simply because consumers are moving. And the place where I'm struggling is, are the consumers moving towards EVs because it's cheaper? Like in the long run, you don't have fuel bills and so on. Or are they moving because it's better for the planet? Or are they moving for both? This idea of causality,
Hmm.
I don't know how to wrap my head around it.
No, I think that's fair. I think we can do a better job of probably correlating it with the time that we're in, right? So I think decision making right now, for instance, is going to be heavily informed by what happened earlier this year. Um, the active, well, I'll just call it the war that was ongoing in Iran. I think that was a big inflection point in people's decision making when it comes to energy in general and like maybe EVs as well. But I think people do think first with their wallet, especially with big ticket items like a car, where they will be thinking about, what is the best economic decision for their personal household and their personal finances, versus smaller things like clothes, for instance, or, glassware. Like in Kenya here, for instance, like a lot of my peers, we have glasses that are made of recycled bottles, like beer bottles and wine bottles and stuff. So there's, small items, there's big items. People will make decisions differently depending on the price of the item. But I think when you start seeing these decisions being made at a country level, I think you can almost bet that it's a shifting tide in terms of belief, right? There was probably some superiority correlated with your diesel guzzling cars. And honestly, I kind of get it. They look pretty cool usually. But then there's the market side of things, right? The money side of things where people are like, actually, this is just a better decision for me and my money. Um, and when it's those big ticket items, I understand when people need it to make sense um, for them financially. It's a big ask to just go with idealism when it's a lot of money involved.
Beautifully said. Again, I'm just so inspired by the way you speak. That's so well put. That is so
Thanks.
well put. I think there is a geographical element to this. And my reading is that certain economies, maybe more mature economies, have the space to
Mm.
then have idealism play a bigger role in their decision. For example, I think Europe is often touted as a place where idealism is at the forefront of decision making, as opposed to um, let's just let's just say global South, where it's economic incentives. And so let's put ourselves into the feet of a would-be clean, rather green tech entrepreneur, aka
Mm.
me in the future. Okay. If I want to start a business within this green tech space, what would you say I should keep my eyes out for in the next 5 years or in the next 5, 10 years? Like your global reading of where we're moving.
Man, maybe I should do a bit more of a like wider study because that's such a great question. I'm not exactly sure if there's one particular product industry that I would put on top of the other, but I am always thinking about greening cities because I think everything is downstream of that as well. When we think about like even the tech that exists, so much of it I find to be localized to the particular place that maybe it was created in. So I feel like I think about food being a massive connection to the climate question and issue as well. It's also there's a polluting factor of agrarian work that I don't think people outside of the space necessarily talk about, but how do you make farming more climate, friendly and adaptive? And on the other side of it, how do you make sure food systems are also, adapted to a climate in which things are kind of going haywire, because they will for a while, right? They've already started going haywire. So let's like deal with the reality that we're in. But maybe from a biased perspective of what I want to see, and I think I can imagine being the case going forward, is greener cities. So I have seen already like these green auto rickshaws or tuk-tuks or three-wheelers, whatever you call them. I've seen these green ones, and they're quiet and they are brilliant, and just as comfy and as fun as your regular three-wheeler. But I'm thinking about like cityscapes, and I'm thinking about just regular transportation and energy and the buildings that we inhabit, like retrofitting, all of that. I think like that's going to be a massive opportunity, depending on where you are as well, because climate adaptation is a thing, but also mitigative impacts of working on those areas. Um, so I won't say that this is perhaps the best read on the situation, but like that's where I'm leaning towards.
So, I mean, let's hypothetically say you are the, I don't know which department this would fall under, but let's say you're in a position of power in one of these companies and you have your hands on the levers to pull. Where would you, as someone directing government funds, where would you place that money?
I, yeah, definitely into greening a city, man. I mean, it could be, it's one of those things where I see it as jobs as well, because I think we already have a massive issue in many places of jobs. And I'm not even talking about the AI shift. I'm just talking about a youth boom around, some of the developing countries. Um, and for background, like I spend a lot of time focusing on education as well, and seeing that there's this massive divide that's emerging in terms of technology, and then also climate change affecting certain groups of children and their access to education, like I alluded to earlier. And so I'm kind of obsessed with not just decision making for what's a good climate resilient future, but what is a nice solution that like checks a bunch of boxes. So I am thinking about jobs as well. And I think anything that's highly automated is probably going to happen anyways, but is not necessarily going to take care of a lot of people who need gainful employment. Um, so greening cities is this like green, like New Deal informed pipe dream that I have, in which, young professionals get a little bit of upskilling at least to get started, and they can help create cities that are greener. And by that I mean not just like trees everywhere, but also more efficient planning and ways that keep cities cool. Because those are long-term jobs, those are long-term issues. So yeah, energy and greening cities, I think if I had the power, that's where I would put it.
Sticking with the hypothetical, how does one deploy that capital? Do you give subsidies to entrepreneurs to then go ahead and build these new sustainable building materials, or do you force companies or rather buildings to retrofit sustainable materials into their infrastructure? I am not sure what the best way forward is, and I'd love to know if there's some economic data that speaks to which method might be more effective. Maybe it's
Yeah, I
even a
think
method that I'm not speaking about.
no, that's fair. I think it would be context specific. It always is, right? Like if you're in a place that is particularly pro greening things, like the idealistic places that you were mentioning, for instance, right? That maybe can work more on the basis of idealism than pure necessity. Then I can imagine it would be a matter of just like pop the idea out there, maybe subsidize a few companies, but like I think it could naturally happen with the right policy based impetus. But I think in places that are developing still and have like a lot of catching up to do, for their own people, not by any measure of comparing countries across the board, because I find that to be pointless. Um, I can imagine that over there is when you need a top down approach, where you need. Hey, first of all, let me just say, I think there are always people who want to work on these types of things. Like, I will have conversations with people and they exist, but they're probably not empowered financially well enough, right? And I think it's like, what is in line with the government's focus, or what do they care about right now? And planting trees, frankly, and I say this looking at many of the governments in the world, is not enough, frankly. It won't fix the problems that we're talking about. Um, And I'm not sure what I'm mentioning is also going to be the biggest fix, but I think it's a great place to start because cities are a massive hub for things going wrong, when it could be the opposite way around. But I think in certain places where things are kind of, just being built up, I think giving the right incentives with money and empowering those who already have it kind of figured out and the solutions, because they already exist. It's nothing particularly new. It's just implementation time. I think that's what needs to happen. So again, like no one policy for everywhere in the world, but I think it's, if you're an idealistic place, you can probably make it happen quite quickly. And honestly, the government could probably bankroll it. But if you're in a place where companies do need that extra push and that extra help, that's where I would put the money.
How do we design, and again, I know this is a broad question, we can go into the details, but how do we design an education system? Okay, we have shared context. Let's take India, for example. How do
Sure.
we design a education system that keeps sustainability at the forefront, but at the same time, not but at the same time, and at the same time, ensures that so much of India that doesn't get basic education gets it? I think it's often phrased as a tussle between actually giving them basic education versus talking about quote unquote high level ideas. And so I'd love to know how to navigate this space.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to go back and change my answer and say that if I had all the power to make these kinds of decisions, first of all, I would put more money into education because it is so severely underfunded the world over. And then it just like, that's always a pain point for me. But yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I think that I'll tackle the first part of the question. I always think about like this whole idea of greening the curriculum and what does that mean? Because one can go into the social part of climate action and the moral part of climate action. And I think that comes up at a later point, maybe in one's education around climate change. But I've heard of these amazing examples of children from a young age being given a form of connection or like cultivating a form of connection with nature. And I think of all the amazing people that we look up to in the world and some of their stories of why they did what they did. And I think more often than not, they have some like beautiful moment in nature that just connected them. And it was this care and this love and this hopefully not ownership, but this sense of like, I'm not sure what the right word is, but it's like we exist on this planet together. That is a living species like me, born and dies, eats in between and sleeps in between and does everything else like me. We just look a bit different. And I feel like starting that at a young age is something that I would always call for based on the local context, right? And one thing I always think about is I wish I knew more about the places that I grew up in terms of the environment that I inhabited. So things like my water source, where is the water coming from? Where is it, what is, what grows over here? The food that is native to where I live. And small activities like that, planting and gardening, for instance. And then you can get into the science of it, but the science is not the only place that we can take this. Some people give the example of like mathematics with a bit of a climate example in it. And I'm like, yeah, sure, because it's the reality. Why not involve that instead of like 3 kids are dividing a bag of sweets? I don't know. But at the same time, I feel like we don't have to stop at the sciences. We can talk about or geography. And I think we can go past that and create a very real connection that is valued at like the diploma level with nature rather than making it seem like, oh, that's a nice to have. Like you care about the humanities. Like, no, you're a builder of tomorrow. You said consumer, and that is true, but also you are a builder of tomorrow. Do you care about the rest of the world that you inhabit? Like, I think that care can start so young, and children have the power to influence their families because we see them as these pure beings as well, right? Like they are so impressionable. And I feel like that's the perfect time to like allow them to connect, give them the space to connect. And I know it's harder in some contexts than others. Frankly, I don't have an answer for those contexts in which funding is already very scarce, because I think that has so many more requirements to be met before we get there. But I think the standard should be set that we should have a connection with nature from a young age, regardless of where we are.
Yeah, I suppose for those, and I agree with everything that you said. I think for those resource starved areas, and just as a whole, I push back on those arguments that people make when they present this as a binary or they present sustainability as an add on. Sustainability
Mm,
just being the umbrella term I'm using to
sure.
describe everything that you just said. I think that premise that this is an extra thing to be talked about is something that we need to dismantle. So part of the venture that I was running, part of what we had to do was to subsidize some of our outreach. So this was not something that we were paid for, obviously, but I decided to take the venture to rural schools and so on because I
Mm,
felt like, aren't they the biggest stakeholders in some ways? Folks who actually live next to the forest, those who actually interface with nature in a way that someone like you and me, who's grown up in a city, never did. And so
mm,
I think that's important.
I agree.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
I'd love to know if you ever had one of those instances that you described, because I did. This idea of at a very young age having and I'm just going to tell you stories. I was 14 years
Yeah.
old when I went to the southern border of Karnataka, which is the state that I'm in, and I came face to face with a wild tiger. This was in a jeep, the normal tourist shebang, but that experience had some physical, like had it. I think it changed the brain chemistry in my head. I'm convinced of it because of how powerful that animal just appeared in front of me and the way it looked into my eyes. I knew that something changed in me. I'd love to know if you'd had one of these, and if you haven't, how do you think we can engineer it so that more kids have this? Because I'm convinced that if more people have such experiences early in life at the right impressionable age, as you said, the builders of tomorrow will be building different things than they're building now.
I think coming down to how you can kind of create these experiences at a younger age, I genuinely don't think that it's sufficient to go towards the parents and like say, this is on you. A lot of parents are working their hardest, and sending a child to school is not something I take for granted. So I think they're doing their part of it there, and teachers are really stretched in a lot of contexts as well. But I think that's the best conduit of small things like we're going to plan something today and we're going to watch it over the course of the year. And school gardens, for instance, I've heard of so many examples of school gardens where the school meals come from a garden that has been made and maintained within the school grounds. Land is an issue in some places, that isn't always a given. Um, but one thing I'm coming to realize through facing these questions and these conversations a bit more, there are people who are willing to do the work. They just need the right resources to make it happen. And they don't even have to be involved in the school system. And I've worked with a few of these people as well, and I'm constantly inspired. People have the solutions. They just need that opportunity to bring the idea to life. So yeah, maybe a school garden in some places, maybe visiting a farm, a local farm in another, and then learning a bit more about the local farming system and how it relates. Like it's probably something that, is present in the back of one's mind, but is not something that they see and appreciate. Um, yeah, I think those kinds of practical skills and tools, that could be really cool. Whether it's a class or if it's like, I don't know, part of physical education, because it kind of is a physical education.
I have a few rapid fire questions to end with.
Go for it.
Tell me about some piece of media. It could be a book, a movie, maybe some piece of social media, because that's the generation we're living in, that has fundamentally impacted you. And this doesn't have to live within this climate question. I'm just talking generally something that has shaped the person sitting in front of me today.
Yeah, sure. I really do think development as freedom is what shaped me, like my trajectory in a lot of ways, which is one that I'm still figuring out, to be really blunt and honest. That one really helped me. It helped me to see rather a form in which economic growth of a certain kind can, don't want to use the word liberate, but can really allow for freedoms. And freedom is not just this big thing. It's like freedom of choice and freedom to live and have a healthy, high quality life.
What about a piece of feedback that you've received from a mentor, and a mentor could be anyone, that has shaped the person in front of me today?
Probably someone, one of my professors in college told me not to pursue law and to go into studying economics a little bit more, which is really cool. I don't know I don't know who I would be if I were a lawyer right now. Maybe I would have been in the same path, who knows? But yeah, I think one of those professors definitely.
I have a closing tradition on this podcast. Every guest I get on gets this question. If you had access to billboards across the world for just
Yeah.
one day, what message would you put up
That is a great question because I hate billboards. And I would probably
there?
instead ask a bunch of artists from the area to go paint on them because that's way better to look at. But the message, I'm sure that's what you're asking about. The message I would want people to read is you have the power to make changes that you want to see in the world. And you are not alone in making those changes happen. Um, but get started in the ways that you can. Don't and this is like in the smaller text if anyone really wants to read it, don't wait for someone to make the change happen. Because I really think we all have the power in us to make small changes, big changes. It's just a decision to start.
Aishwarya, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have 3 small requests to ask you. If you enjoy listening to the episode, then please subscribe. Second, please share this with someone who you think will find it valuable. You see, a lot of effort and time goes into creating these podcasts. And so by sharing it, you'll help me reach new audiences, and that'll help keep the show alive. Third, please tell me your thoughts. You can reach out to me on social media, on email, and so on, and tell me what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, and new guests and episodes that you'd like to have discussed on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.